Hello, explorers, and welcome to Reach the World's Explorer program. For 25 years, Reach the World has inspired youth to become curious, confident, and compassionate global citizens through virtual exchange. My name is Tim. I'm so glad you're joining us for today's live stream event. It's a new year. You may be saying to yourself, hey, wait, I thought the Endurance22 Expedition already found Sir Ernest Shackleton's ship a while back. If that's you saying that, you are 100% right. And I'm happy to share that just because the active expedition is complete, it doesn't mean the active learning is over too. All of your favorite Endurance22 virtual exchange resources are available on demand, and classrooms around the world have been reliving the excitement of that experience using those materials and more from the Royal Geographical Society at their own pace since 2022. Today's live stream is one of several we've planned for this year to give students who are new to the expedition a chance to meet and learn live from expedition team members. All of this is building to the forthcoming very exciting release of a major documentary film about the expedition. So there's really no better time to be joining the adventure. I am so glad you're here today. Our guests today are two of my favorite Endurance22 colleagues. I'm so excited to introduce you to Carla-Louise, research scientist at the South African Weather Service, and Marc, physical oceanographer now at the University of Connecticut. Carla and Marc have so much to teach us about meteorology, oceanography, and how they collected important data in the Southern Ocean and Weddell Sea throughout the Endurance22 expedition. Finally, before I bring Carla and Marc on screen, I want to give a warm welcome to the teachers and students who are joining us live today. We've added a couple notes to the chat bar and YouTube with some important links if you're interested in getting further involved in the on-demand version of the Endurance22 virtual exchange. Please check those out. And also for today, please feel free to use the YouTube chat bar wherever you are to let us know you're here, where you're joining from, and of course, to share any burning questions you have for Carla and Marc as we go. I think we're going to cover a lot of ground today, and I think it's going to inspire a lot more questions. So curiosity is a beautiful thing. Get those questions into the chat bar, and we will get to as many questions as we can in the next 45 minutes. And with that, I'm going to bring our guests onto the screen. Welcome, Carla-Louise and Marc.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, it's great to see you both. How are you?
Good, and yourself, Tim?
Doing great. We were talking before the show. Carla-Louise is in Cape Town. Marc is in Connecticut, and I think there's something like 100 degrees difference between the weather you're experiencing today, Carla, and what Marc and I are experiencing in the US. So that explains us shivering on our screen and you being nice and warm and summer in Cape Town. So it's really exciting and great to be connecting with you both from truly around the world. We've got lots of students and teachers joining us today. I want to really dive right in because there's so much for us to talk about. The last time we spoke, especially through a live stream like this, we were on the Oceanography 2. I believe we were just entering or getting close to the ice edge of the Weddell Sea. If anyone was watching that recording, I rudely interrupted you and got real excited because there was a crab-eater seal floating by on a piece of ice. Very exciting moment for me. But will you remind us to start with, Carla, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us what your job is and what you do and what you're doing on the Endurance22 expedition, please.
Thanks, Tim. Hi, everyone. I'm Carla-Louise Ramjukadh. I work at the South African Weather Service as a research scientist, as introduced by Tim. I work in the marine space. On the Endurance22 trip, myself and Marc were meteorologists on board, helping with any oceanographic or meteorological information that was needed by the crew or the team, and for the ship to sail safely into the ice and find the ship. So that was my part, assisting where I could.
All right, and what do you do like when you're not on a great expedition?
That's right. So I work in the marine space. At the moment, I'm finding my space in the coastal vulnerability area, around the South African coastline. So we try to keep the community safe when it comes to beach awareness and coastal awareness as well, if there are any vulnerabilities that are approaching the coast. So that's the space that I'm finding myself in the recent time since our expedition. So I'm really enjoying that space. It combines atmospheric meteorological conditions along with oceanographic conditions, puts the two together, and it spits out what's going to happen along the coast so that we can warn the communities along the coast if we need to.
All right, amazing. Thanks, Carla. Let's turn it over to you, Marc.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Marc De Vos. I'm also South African, but I've recently relocated to the US to take up a new position. And I worked with Carla at the South African Weather Service for about 7 years. I'm an oceanographer. I've kind of moved during my career so far between two major research areas. The one is coastal oceanography, so waves, tides, storm surges, that kind of thing, which is what I'm involved with at the moment, modeling these things and simulating them. And sea ice research, which is the reason I found myself on the Endurance22 Expedition. So those have really sort of developed both of my research areas, but also that's what I'm passionate about scientifically. And that's kind of my scientific background.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you both for joining us today. I'm going to bring up photos of you in action. We've got some very serious looking expedition portraits on the left of you. And then I had to add the one on the right because this is how I fondly remember you, smiling and enjoying your work so much as part of the expedition. But I'm going to turn things over to you. I know you have a lot you want to talk about. I'll sort of jump in as we go. But let's dive right in. Really starting with what area of the world are we talking about? You talked about both being originally from South Africa. Carla, do you want to talk about this map, what this map is showing us?
So this is a map, just an overview map of the almost complete cruise plan that we did. If I'm looking at it correctly, I think those were the dates we were going down or coming back up, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
going down. Is it going down?
Yes, correct.
That's going down. So that's kind of the cruise plan that the ship took down towards the ice. As you can see, the colorful space at the bottom down where it says Weddell Sea. So that's our path that we took through the Southern Ocean to get to where we needed to go find Shackleton's ship. And it's a pretty rough space to be in, to be honest. I think Tim has a fond reminder of us going down through the Southern Ocean and how it can be rough with the waves and seasickness. It can be very interesting. But I think Mark can jump in there if I'm not seeing anything that he can add there.
No, I think that's exactly it. The interesting thing about this map for me is it shows the path that the ship took from Cape Town down to almost the Weddell Sea. But the path is very curved, and even if we had taken a straight line from Cape Town to the Weddell Sea, the line on a flat map would still look slightly curved. That's maybe one for the geography teachers to explain. But it wouldn't necessarily look as curved as it is. And the reason why we had to deviate so far to the west instead of going relatively more straight is because we were avoiding weather at the time. So there was a big storm system moving from the west towards the east, and we were trying to dodge that storm so that we didn't damage people or equipment too badly, because the waves in the center of that storm or near that storm were in the region of 10 to 15 meters. So that's the reason why the path looks so sort of deviated.
It's very hard for land lovers, people who spend most of their time on land, to really understand what a 10 to 15 meter wave looks like or feels like as it continues to pound you. But I can definitely attest that they're no joke to even the best of ships. And for people who love maps and love sort of not obscure geography, but geography maybe you don't think about every day, right towards the end of that orange line, there are a bunch of little dots, and they are known as the South Sandwich Islands, which I love as just a name for islands. And I fondly remember going around them in order to avoid a pretty big storm that was looming. So it's a good example of Carla and Marc immediately putting their expertise to work, sort of using the assessment of weather conditions to aid in the navigation of the expedition. Marc, can you give us a sense, like, do ships normally go through these waters? Like, is this a place where there's lots of activity?
So there is some activity, and there is some activity year round, but compared to the rest of the world's oceans, it's almost negligible. So it's not that there are no ships, but there are very few ships, and especially during winter. So we went during summer, obviously, because that's when the conditions were likely to be most favorable. The fewest number of storms, the smallest waves, and so on, which, I mean, you were there, you would see even in summer in the Antarctic, it can be pretty rough. But in winter, I mean, these waters are almost completely free of ships just because they're so rough. But there might be some.
Great. Throughout that experience, I heard the phrase data deprived quite often as it relates to this area, which I'll refer to as the Southern Ocean. It's as distinct from the Weddell Sea, which is closer to where the Endurance wreck was. Carla, can you talk about what it means to be data deprived and what an opportunity it is to sort of sail through, from a scientist's perspective, a data deprived waters?
So the Southern Ocean is, unfortunately, like you said, data deprived. As Marc said, not a lot of ships go down to this part of the ocean, or this part of the Earth at least, to deploy instruments like what we did on board, which you assisted with on a few times as well. So there's not a lot of ships that can, or instruments that are found in these waters that can be deployed so that models can be able to better predict the weather conditions down there. That's when we mean data deprived. When we do deploy, it's only a handful of instruments. It's not like we're chucking out tons and tons at a time. So the instruments that we do deploy and the data that they do retrieve is very important and does make a big difference to models and predict the predictions for the Southern Ocean as well.
Well, great. That's a great segue. Can you sort of explain what this chart represents in that context?
Sure, no problem. So this is actually our deployment sheet that we had on the Endurance. This was the data sheet for various instruments. We had drifters, we had spotters, and we had Argo floats, which a lot of the schools were a part of deploying together with us and naming as well. So this was basically just the lines of latitude that we would deploy the various instruments at, and sometimes it would take a long time to get to those lines of latitude, but sometimes you can reach it really quickly on time. So it was very tiring at some points because it feels like you're waking up every hour. Other times it's hours, long days in between. So this data sheet has just got the number for the serial number where on the latitude, and then basically me telling the captain to slow down to 8 knots so that I don't fall off at the back of the ship, so that I can deploy the instrument. Yeah.
That's a great description. And for students who are trying to imagine what the daily life of a field scientist doing this sort of work looks like, we are talking about day or night, storm or no storm, beautiful seas, 15-meter chop seas. When that ship gets close to that line of latitude, you have to deploy that buoy. Like, that's when it goes in the water. It needs to start there in order to have a really well orchestrated set of data coming in. We can talk a little bit more about that, but I witnessed firsthand the dedication of Carla and Marc, especially, in making sure these buoys were deployed exactly where they needed to go, because this data was so valuable to the world scientists, really, who are studying the oceans, that, it might have been jarred you out of a great sleep or a great dream, or it made you come out of your warm bed and have to put on 3 layers of winter clothing so you could go back out and get soaked from, the spray from the back deck. But this was a beautifully planned and executed plan. And it looked a lot like this. Maybe, Carla, you can tell us what we're looking at here.
Sure. This is our our holding room for all our deployments, if you want to call it that. So we're looking at boxes and crates of Argo floats. There we already written on some of the names that the schools were given, and your trusty seal that came with us on the whole journey, Tim. So yeah, so basically, I think that was the first time that I actually had operated a drill to open up the Argo floats myself. So that's me just basically drilling so that I can get to the instruments and open them up and get them ready for deployment. But yes, as you can see, we had a room full of instruments of various sizes, getting them ready, and us just getting ready to deploy and not getting squished in between the instruments as the ship is rocking in the waves at the same time.
I sort of recall this photo is early on. This is sort of like the full load of buoys to be deployed. Towards the end, this room got pretty empty after everything went in the sea. But maybe here's a picture of 3 of the 4 types of buoys that were deployed. Maybe Mark, you can talk us through what these buoys are and how they work and what kind of data they collect.
Sure. So the first one on the left-hand side is formerly called an SVP drifter, a surface velocity profiler, and we sort of informally call them drifting weather buoys. So the part that's in the cardboard box there at the top, that's just a float, and the float has a little antenna and a little sea surface temperature sensor, and also a barometer which measures the atmospheric pressure. And then that sort of funny looking bit down at the bottom there, that's sort of made of material, sort of fabric, is actually a long drogue. And what a drogue is something that's designed to catch the currents. It's like an underwater sail. And it opens up like a long sock, basically. And it extends down to 15 meters. So the idea behind this buoy is it drifts along in the ocean with a float at the surface and this sock to kind of steer it according to the ocean currents. And it does a couple things. It'll tell you a bit about the ocean currents based on where it's drifting. It'll tell you about the sea surface pressure, which is good for figuring out where storms at sea are located, for example. And it'll measure the ocean temperature. And the data that it collects there are 2 purposes. Firstly, it gets plugged into weather prediction models to kind of make their predictions more accurate, because it's a sort of ground truthing of what the conditions are really, how the conditions are unfolding in the real world. And secondly, they get archived for later research by oceanographers or weather scientists. On the right-hand side, there are 2 instruments. The one on the left-hand side of the right-hand photograph is an Argo float, which Carla explained. So that basically profiles the ocean. It drops down using a buoyancy control system to about 1,000 meters, if I'm not mistaken. And it measures temperature and salinity and various other variables if you equip it with the right sensors, all the way down to 1,000 meters, pops up, measuring all the way up again to the surface. And when it gets to the surface, it transmits those data to a data center. And again, they get plugged into prediction models, but they also get archived for research. And the last little one that looks like, I don't know if patty pans are found all over the world, or if that's just a South African vegetable. But anyway, there's a little yellow buoy there on the right-hand side that kind of looks to me like a patty pan. It's called a wave spotter, made by a company called So Far Ocean, and that's a free drifting buoy that measures ocean wave characteristics. So it'll tell us about the wave height, the period of those waves, and the direction of those waves. And they also use it to improve wave predictions and, of course, archive for research.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Patty pans, yes. I think are at least known to
which other people
vegetable lovers around the world, and that's a great description of how that buoy works. You also sort of remind me that depending on the accent of the speaker, the word buoy is often pronounced, sort of sounds as boy to certain listeners and speakers of the English language. And there were endless jokes about me talking about throwing boys overboard regularly as part of this expedition. So just to clarify, there were no young men were hurt in the collection of this data. It's all scientific, very complex and amazing scientific instruments that were deployed as part of this.
Well, you almost threw yourself over a few times helping me deploy the ark. So.
Everybody survived. So amazing. That's part of sort of the data collection of that you two were really in charge of on our route to and from the Weddell Sea. This is obviously a photo of the Oceanography 2 embedded in the ice of the Weddell Sea. Tell us, maybe Carla, tell us a little bit about how your role switched, or what sort of started, or how it was different once we got into the Weddell Sea and the active search for Endurance began.
I think our jobs got a little bit relaxed once we hit the ice and started looking for the ship. Well, at least mine did, because I didn't have to get up for deployments anymore. I think Mark still kind of continued in trying to give the weather and the tide predictions for the days of what operations will be like for the day. So in this picture, I got to enjoy to go out on the ice if I could and help other teams collect data when it came to sea ice as well. So that was a really great experience. It was my first time walking actually on sea ice and not actually on land, which was kind of mind-boggling at the same time. So you don't realize that there's like thousands of meters of water below your feet. So which was kind of weird, but you didn't feel scared at all. I didn't, at least. So that was kind of cool for me. So at this point, it was just basically soaking up and learning from the other scientists that were on board as well, learning more about sea ice and the collection and how people do the different collections for just sea ice and snow as well, and the type of instruments that they do. So it was a great opportunity to work with a bigger team of scientists around the world, being able to learn from them and how they do their research as well.
Excellent. That's a great opportunity to plug the full sort of science report that came out of the Endurance22 expedition. If you go to endurance22.org, then you can access and download the amazing report produced by, Carla, Marc, and the whole science team. Includes all sort of aspects we could spend hours talking about, and hopefully we get a chance to in the future talk about all the amazing science work that came out of that team. I want to just sort of give an insight or a preview, not a preview, an actual view of your workspace on the Oceanography 2. South African Weather Service has a dedicated space on the South African vessel, the Oceanography 2. Had either of you been on a cruise aboard the ship, maybe not to this area of the Weddell Sea, but previously have played this role as part of another cruise aboard the ship?
Yeah, so
I
think we both had several times prior to this. Although the work on this particular expedition was pretty unique. There were certain aspects which we had done before, but a lot of it was unique. But yeah, we had both sailed on the vessel.
All right, excellent. Well, you were familiar with the layout of the ship, which took a while for us newcomers to learn. And I don't know if you remember, but I wrote an article about like my search through the ship to find this door that you can see on the left-hand side. I was trying to find you two, and I just got hopelessly lost, and it became like a maze. But I eventually found you, and I found my way to your office many times over the course of the time we spent together. And this is sort of your office space. Can you talk about like what we're looking at here? What sort of like daily work you would do? And then we're going to sort of virtually walk through that door at the back of the room. You can give us a little preview of where that leads.
Yeah, okay. I'll start with these front computers, and then Carla can maybe talk about the back ones. So the first three screens that you see there are basically just laptops that we're using to pull data from around the world and ingest into some software that we use to help produce a forecast and then brief the ship's navigation team and the expedition planners on what to expect. And that's an ongoing process. So those computers are on 24/7, and we've got all kinds of routines that run to pull data as it becomes available. And then we sort of had set times of the day where we would pop up to the office to analyze it and adjust our briefings if required. And then there's another set of computers at the back there, Carla, which I guess you can...
No, sure, no problem. Actually, the ones on the same desk, but just behind it, as Marc has explained, that computer was our second computer, just second in command computer, if you want to call it that, but it was also a very important one. It would connect to the sensors when we deployed weather balloons, which I'm sure we'll get to in a minute, so I don't want to give anything away. So that the data from the weather balloons would be collected, or you can visualize it on that set of computers that are just behind the ones in the front.
And very importantly, everything in that office is screwed down.
Oh, yes.
Except for the chairs.
But they're not on wheels.
Interesting sometimes. Everything is nicely set, and then you rock back on your chair nearly. That happened to me several times.
That is such a good point that, you know, if it wasn't, that all would be on the floor on the other side of the room, because the ship is going, like, especially in these areas that are so of the rough Southern Ocean that you were so eager to study. All right, let's sort of like virtually together, open that door, lift that crate. Actually, it looks like the door is open at the back of the room in the right-hand picture. And if we walk through that room, we find this. Carla, what are you doing in this photo?
So this is one of the weather balloons that we were busy blowing up. Before it got too big, it was Valentine's that day. So I thought I would write a happy Valentine's Day to the world out there. So we're not kind of left alone in the ice. We're still here, people. So there's before we just deployed and fully blown up the balloon. I wrote quickly happy Valentine's Day. This balloon looks like it's still on the ground, so it hasn't been fully inflated yet. Once it has, we attach the sensor, and I think, do you have another picture of us deploying?
I don't have a picture or video of you deploying, but on Reach the World social media channels, I shared a video clip of from some great educational films that were made around your work of you releasing a balloon. So anyone who wants to see Carla releasing a weather balloon should definitely go there and check it out. I do have, though, sort of like pictures of the aftermath. Once this balloon has been released, why don't you take us from there?
Okay, cool. So we attach a little sensor to the balloon, and then we'll release it out, and it climbs. What's the highest that I think that we got, the reading that we got, Mark? Do you perhaps remember?
Oh, just shy of the stratosphere, 60,000 feet, 65,000 feet, thereabouts.
And this little sensor would record various variables: temperature, humidity, what's other variables that you can think of? Pressure, yes, dew point. So all of that information would be feeding back to the screen. As you can see, we could visually see all of that information coming back, what the balloon has been indicating about what of the weather conditions that are happening above us in the ship. Essentially, these is information the same way that the various instruments that we would deploy in the sea would feed back into a bigger global space. These weather balloons feed into that bigger space as well to give us and help us to predict weather or make better weather predictions for the next coming days. So
All right, well, that's a big task. I mean, if you're put in charge of predicting the weather or anticipating what the next day might be, there's a lot of ramifications to that, and the mix of a complicated search for a shipwreck beneath the ice. That sort of leads me to one of my very fondest memories as part of my morning routine for quite a while, to get a cup of coffee and come down to the theater and hear Marc's morning briefing. Marc, can you tell us more about what this is, sort of, as I understand it, where that data went and sort of how you use the data?
Yeah, in a way, you're absolutely right. So this is just it's one software package that I use on board. We use several. So something that I've learned over the years is when you go on a ship to Antarctica, take several options with you. So it's not one particular model, it's not one particular software, it's not one computer. Take several of each, and it's basically about, if one goes down, or using them all to build a picture. So this is one particular software package, which is visualizing data from one of the weather prediction models, into which some of the data which we were collecting from Carla's instruments would have gone. And my morning ritual was to download as much data as I could to the ship and then take a look at all of it. And often there would be quite a lot of disagreement between the models in terms of what to expect. So there would be disagreements in the temperature forecast of up to 10 degrees Celsius, the wind directions would be different. The timing of the arrival of a storm would be different and so on. So, I say this tongue in cheek, but Antarctic forecasting on an operation like this is almost more of an art sometimes than a science. And you sort of learn which model to trust in which situations and which one does a better job of forecasting the wind versus the temperature and so on. And that was sort of my morning ritual, was to look at all of this data and then try and come up with what I thought was going to happen, and then present that to the leadership on board to do with what they thought was best.
That's such a great description. I can just share from an audience member's perspective for these morning briefings that the other people in the room were really, depending on this data to inform the search for endurance. There were a lot of complicated factors involved where the search went, like the approach, how ambitious, what to do with the marine robotics, is all very much informed by how severe or, calm the weather was going to be for the day. Did you feel a lot of pressure in that situation to really in this art of sort of reconciling different models, coming up with something that was really going to set this team up for success? They were looking at their faces, they were dead serious about this. There was a lot on the line,
Yeah, I absolutely did feel pressure, especially initially, before you sort of know everybody really well and get the feel for things. I wasn't uncomfortable with the data or the systems because even if I don't use them every day for my professional work, I basically look at weather and ocean models all day, every day, trying to find the best surfing conditions. So I was very comfortable with that aspect of comparing them, but I certainly felt the pressure to get it right for this sort of unique use case. And one of the biggest challenges was getting the timing of the wind changes correct, because obviously the ship is locked into the ice flows, and the ice flows go where the ocean and the winds are making them drift. And so it doesn't help to deploy the robot here when you have a fixed length of tether and then the ship drifts 20 nautical miles in a different direction and you run out of tether. So really forecasting the wind shifts in speed and direction and the timing of those shifts was probably the biggest challenge.
Well, I feel like sometimes you got to be the bearer of good news, that it was going to be a bright, sunny, beautiful day, not too cold. And some days you had to share the hard truth that it was going to be pretty brutal working conditions on the back deck, and that everyone should really bundle up. So in lots of different ways, that data really informed operations. Carla mentioned briefly that tide played a role in this. Can you, I still barely understand how tide can affect the Weddell Sea, where, it's covered in ice. You don't really think about the water rising and lowering, or you can't see it visually. I think many people who live near oceans understand tide and what it looks like on a beach and the water level along a beach. But how does tide work as it relates to understanding ice and the operations for Endurance 22?
Well, tides, obviously the effect of the moon and the sun's pull on the Earth's oceans. And I think everybody probably knows that. The effect that it has in practice is when you're close to coastal areas, and especially around constrictions of any kind, so channels or semi-enclosed coastlines, like, for example, the Long Island Sound on the East Coast, then there's a lot of water getting funneled through a narrow area, and it can cause quite strong tidal currents. So that's one effect. We were not too close to the Antarctic Peninsula. We were quite far from it. So although we were in a large enclosed basin called the Weddell Sea, that effect wasn't too pronounced. Rather, what we were more worried about was it seemed to have an effect on the consolidation of the ice. So what happened is, the best way to describe this is with my hands. When the tide rose, there was kind of more water beneath the ice, and the ice flows would tend to loosen up like this. And when it fell, they would kind of move together and all knit together like that and make them more difficult to breakthrough. So that was sort of the main consideration, and especially the guys working on the aft deck, they noticed that it was a lot easier to, create some space behind the vessel and break through the ice floes to deploy the robot when the tide had risen and those ice floes were a little bit looser in relation to each other. And when they were closing and knitting as the tide dropped, it became really difficult for them.
All right. Very, very interesting. The last slide I have is not necessarily about oceanography or about meteorology, but certainly played a big role in my enjoyment of life aboard the ship. And this, maybe Carla, you want to talk about what we're looking at here for someone who's not maybe from South Africa or unfamiliar?
Sure, I guess I am the best one because I'm the tea lover, where Marc is the coffee lover. So the snack we both love, but I'll talk about the tea. The tea is called Rooibos tea. I think it's, I think back home, Tim, they would call it red bush, if I'm not mistaken, but it's pronounced Rooibos in South Africa. And is actually you can only find that plant growing here in the Cederberg in South Africa. So that's where it's grown and that's where they harvest to make this tea. And it's really a specialty tea. A lot of people like it. Some people like it to drink it with milk. I don't know why, but you should actually supposed to have it black, in my opinion. So it has its own unique taste. It doesn't. I think Tim can attest to that. It's just something unique. It's refreshing. It's light. It's not too heavy. It's not very dark, but it's one of my favorite teas to have when I just want something, especially in the winter and it's cold, something warm. And yes, Marc will talk about the snack. He loves this snack, so I think I'd give him the honor to explain.
I think he introduced me to the snack, and I'm so glad he did.
Yeah, so this is
before you jump in. I just want to let all the Reach the World students know at tea time, tea and coffee was provided at any time during the day. But at tea time, you would get certain snacks available. So this is I can see this is Tim's fingers and his hands and his cup that he brought on board. He would make sure that you find yourself at a tea station so that you can get your tea time snacks before supper or between lunch. So Marc, you can go ahead.
Yeah, and it's kind of shameful, I suppose, to reflect on all these professionals, adults running around the ship to raid the kitchens as the snacks are delivered, and within 10 minutes they're none to be found because everybody's flattened the rusks that were put out at 3 p.m. or whatever. Yeah, so this is a rusk. It's like, what is it, Carla? It's bread that's been baked several times or something. Yeah, but it's quite sweet because I guess they put a lot of sugar in it as well. So that's a really hard treat that you dip into tea, and then it kind of just melts in your mouth when you eat it. And the trick is obviously not to dip it for too long because then you could have a structural failure of the rusk, which is just the worst. And this particular kind is called a buttermilk rusk, which is my favorite. You get several kinds with raisins and all kinds of things in them. But this, in my opinion, is the king of the South African tea time snack.
Yes. Any of you who've played outside in the snow in the US as part of this cold snap and have come in and had like a nice warm cup of hot chocolate or something to warm up will understand that a nice warm drink when it's cold outside goes a long way to just like warming up your body and making you feel good, maybe after you've been uncomfortable outside where it's cold. And to explain one thing that Marc described in very scientific terms, structural failure of a rusk means that when you dunk it into a liquid, it starts to soften. This otherwise very hard sort of biscuit, you could tap it against something and it would bang, it wouldn't break. When you dip it, it gets nice and soft. But if you keep it submerged too long, it sort of like crumbles into crumbs and sinks to the bottom of your glass. And then, that's not the ideal situation. It takes some practice to dip it for just the right period of time. But just an extraordinary South African tradition, snack, just one of the beautiful sort of things that I learned from Marc and Carla, and as being part of this very international expedition on an amazing South African polar resupply ship. So With that, I'm going to sort of take us out of screen share, make our faces a little bit bigger here. I want to encourage anybody who's watching, if you have questions for Marc and Carla, please add them to the chat. I can sort of fold them into the conversation. I'd be happy to do that. In the meantime, I have some questions I've collected that I can sort of share here with you and guide our conversation. A major question amongst Reach the World students is, what do you like the most about your jobs in all of their aspects, either sort of as part of the Endurance22 Expedition or on a regular basis? And what is the hardest thing about being a meteorologist or oceanographer? Give us a sense of sort of the highs and lows of that career path. And Carla, let's start with you.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Sure. I think the really highs of the job that we do is being able to have the opportunities to be part of an expedition like Endurance22. I don't think it's an opportunity that comes around very often, but when they do, like Marc said, we've been on several cruises, so this one was quite a special. So I think that was really a highlight for me and my career so far, is being able to. I've been to the sea ice around Antarctica, but I've never been to the Weddell Sea, so that was really nice for me, a really nice experience. And like I said, being able to walk on the ice is not something that I've done before either, so that was really nice. That was a great experience. I won't say that there are too many lows in this profession, but I think for any scientist, basically, when you stumble a little bit on a question that you're trying to answer, it just takes you a little bit longer sometimes, but you do eventually get there. So, and when you do, that's a really good high, like, you did it. So I wouldn't say that there is any lows in my career so far, but so yeah, I think that's me.
All right, thanks, Carla. How about you, Marc?
Yeah, I agree with Carla. Certainly one of the highlights is being able to see places and do things that you might otherwise not get to do. And I think the other thing that I really enjoy is that weather and ocean science affects basically everybody on the planet every day of their lives. There's very little that happens in life that isn't in some way affected by the weather and the ocean. And I say that because not everybody works on the ocean, but the ocean affects the weather in a major, major way. So it feels like a very relevant and very sort of important line of work, if you put it that way. I think, yeah, and again, I agree with Carla, it can be difficult. It's a technical science, so, there's maths and there's stats and there's physics and things like that, especially initially in your early years of study, so you need to get through that. And it requires a broad skill set. So, maybe you're not so good at computer programming and you're a little bit stronger on the physics, or whatever the case is. So sometimes you find yourself at a place where you're a little bit weak on one skill and you've got to ask for help. But luckily, the help is always there. And especially these days, the answers are almost always online. There are forums of experts that can always help you with something if you have a particular question.
All right, thank you both. That sort of ties into another question that's really common amongst our students, is that, a lot of classrooms in the US and the UK and South Africa helped us adopt some of the weather buoys that were deployed, have been monitoring the data that they're producing live on an ongoing basis as they journey through the ocean, the Southern Ocean. And Marc, you mentioned that weather affects us all. It's interconnected in so many ways. It's complex. It's influenced by lots of different dynamics, including the ocean and, everything that's happening, especially in and around the Antarctic. What happens with the data that the weather buoys deployed by Endurance22 provide to the global sort of community? What can we, you may not know exactly what's happened with that data, but generally speaking, there's a network of buoys deployed all over the world collecting this live data from the ocean. Why do we bother? Why do we go through so much expense for that data? How is it used?
Yeah, it's a good question. To put it in basic terms, there are two main uses. The first one is there's a process called data assimilation. And what that is weather forecasts are based on computer models But I can only tell you what the temperature is going to be in 3 hours from now if I know with accuracy what the temperature is right now, right? So that's the first main use case for these data, is they get plugged into these models to tell the models exactly what the state of the ocean and the atmosphere is at a particular time. And from that good sort of ground truth information, they're able to make a better prediction. The second use case is those data don't get thrown away after they've done their job with prediction. They get archived in what we call climate databases. And the only reason that we're able to tell, for example, that the global temperature has changed relative to the pre-industrial period is because we've done such a good job of archiving all of those data. So building a time series, and what we mean by a time series is just a long record of the measurement of the same variable. Building a time series is really important for climate monitoring, and it's only because we archive those data that scientists are able to tell if and how things are changing on the Earth.
Amazing. Great. We're, as expected, we have so much to talk about today. We've covered a lot of ground. We're running sort of short on time. The final question is for Carla. What advice would you give to young people who think what you and Marc do is really cool? And I know what you do is a little bit different, but who are interested in, this branch of science that is so physical, is so like part of our changing Earth and understanding our Earth. What advice would you give to young people who think what you do is really cool and might want to do it as well someday down the road?
Sure. I would say the interest has to be there. Advice. I mean, we are, like Marc said, we part of this bigger picture where something that affects everybody, no matter how small or how big, how close or how far you are from the ocean. Everybody's get affected by it somehow, and you working in this little time or this little space for that little moment in time makes a huge difference, or can contribute into somebody's life being saved, life being changed, or adding to somebody's experience. Marc going surfing, for example, or learning to surf for the first time. So he needs to know what the waves is going to be like, and you have a small little contribution to that little bit of enjoyment or change by saving somebody's life, by saying, don't go swim today because the wave is going to be a bit high. The other part of it is being interested in a global atmosphere and ocean space, is being able to have the opportunity like we did and going on an expedition like this. But there are other expeditions, there are other research cruises that you can jump aboard on, and then you can make a contribution to science, basically. But you're not just making a contribution to science and to yourself, but you're making a change to the community, the global community.
All right, Carla, thank you. That was very well said. We are out of time. We're past time, actually. I just want to thank you both so much for spending the time today. I've learned so much from you over the last 2 years. You contributed so much to the Endurance22 Expedition, and I just continue to learn from you, and I know our community does too. So thank you so much for sharing your passion and expertise with us all. I'm going to put handy banner at the bottom of the screen for anyone who's watching and wants to maybe revisit our live stream that we talked about earlier from the SA Gulls 2, where we were entering the ice pack and talking about what was happening at that moment. You can find it there. You can find lots of on-demand virtual exchange itineraries that any K-12 teacher around the world can start whenever they want and sort of relive the excitement of this expedition and all of its various nuances. So as mentioned also at the beginning of the live stream, this is the first of several live streams we're going to be doing this year in 2024 with Endurance22 team members, all leading up to an exciting film release. And I hope you'll join us, please, at any time for future live stream events and for all of the great resources available from Reach the World and the Royal Geographical Society. So Marc and Carla, thank you so much. Carla, stay cool. Marc, stay warm. And we'll see you next time. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thanks, Tim.
Bye.